All right. So here we are. We're with session 7, I guess, which because we did an introduction and then we're on the 6th capacity. So we're going to talk about reason today. I'm really excited to talk about this one because this is traditionally like one of the ones that one of the capacities that doesn't really get full value, but that's been changing the last couple of years. We've rewritten the chapter and it's become more engaging. And what's really cool is to see how people really recognize reason is such an important part of leadership that we don't often discuss. So we're back with Jennifer as we're getting close to the end. I mean, can you believe it?
I can't believe it.
I
Years
know.
flying by.
It really is. So I was wondering, can you okay, here's what's different. You had already had the class on reason, and we didn't make a video for it ahead of time like the other ones. So could you talk about how it went and some of the key things that happened?
Yes, yeah. So, like always, when I'm preparing my agendas, I think I've done this every time, and almost every time I don't. Well, basically, I think about what kind of really fun, exciting group exercise can I do to support the principles of this chapter, to support the discussion. And I usually rack my brain thinking about it. And then after, and there are a lot of good things in the practitioner's guide. Am I calling it the right thing?
Implementation guide, yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of great things in there, but for whatever reason, none of them spoke to me this month. So I got a little frustrated. I said, you know what? I'm just going to have a discussion like I always do. And well, most of the time. And that's what I did again. And I just had some questions prepared and just went in and, I think we've used this example before, kind of threw the ball into the air and just let the group pass it around. And it was a very robust and vibrant discussion like it always is. So, I just bring that up because you don't have to overthink the material or overthink an agenda. The chapters speak for themselves as long as people are reading them. Most likely people are going to engage, and you don't really have to do much to hold that space. So I just wanted to mention that because yet again, I was thinking about what am I going to do? And I really didn't have to do much, but just read the chapter, come in with some questions, have some experiences that I can share of my own, and that was it. So it was a really great discussion. I think 2 stories I would want to share about the reason chapter would be, one, it got really deep and personal for people, this particular chapter. Hearing from a lot of people, guilt associated with their avoidance. Oh, if I hadn't avoided this wouldn't have happened in my life. And it just so happened that day, it was our public health day. And like many communities across the country, we're dealing with a really serious opioid crisis here in our community. And so we talked a lot about that topic throughout the day. And I actually had a class member who is dealing with a family member who has addiction issues. And she actually got up and got quite emotional about her own avoidance to her family member's crisis and how she had avoided it for many, many years. And had she not avoided it, maybe this particular family member would not be as in such a severe situation that they're in. And so it got really emotional. And so there were a lot of stories like that just really made it a very memorable and rich discussion. And then the other thing I would say is later in our wrap-up session, what I really thought was pretty cool is that our participants started making their own connections, bringing in other capacities for the that we've already covered into the discussion. So, for instance, going back to the topic of opioid crisis in our community, we had a lot of practitioners that day visiting us, working in outreach and prevention and all kinds of aspects of the crisis. And what was really cool when we were wrapping up is a lot of participants said, I saw so much resilience in our practitioners. Like, how could they do this work if they weren't resilient leaders? We saw so much authenticity in these practitioners. They couldn't, or I should say purpose. They couldn't do what they were doing if they weren't dedicated heart and soul to this issue. They couldn't be in this space and be so productive in what they were doing. So I thought that was really great about our wrap-up discussion, is they're starting to make the connections. They're starting to think back about other capacities and seeing that in speakers. So I guess that would be the things I remember most about the day.
That's amazing. I was jotting down some notes because I didn't want to forget these related to what you were saying. So one, it sounds like there's a lot more comfort you've seen evolve just in the class itself. I mean, that's just what happens after 6 or 7 months, getting familiar with people and all those little interactions they have, in the meetings or even outside the meetings. And you just start to see your class gel, which isn't really a statement about positive leadership, but just about the overall power of community leadership programs and what happens over the course and what makes it the most so valuable, and why the work is so great. But that positive leadership could contribute to that maybe the story that this woman shared about her family member wouldn't have happened if you didn't have that discussion. And people watching this may not quite make the connection that you're making about avoidance, and that we'll get into all that in the chapter itself.
Right.
So, and it will totally make sense. But yeah, that idea that I was bringing up guilt, that people were actually, not that I like that, I don't want to make people feel guilty, but that it actually was relevant, that it described an experience that they had in maybe ways that they weren't able to describe it in the moment. That's relevant. Yeah.
Right. And I think in a way, the discussion was really, so you talk about guilt, which is kind of a yucky word, but the discussion itself, I think, was really therapeutic for everybody. For those people that were sharing those moments of, oh, if I just wouldn't have avoided, I could have, it was almost like, okay, we've cleared the table of that, and now we understand why we did it and what we can do better next time. And so I think,
that's beautiful. And the idea is that avoidance is the disengagement of reason. It's the ignoring what's in the reality. And so that's what they're avoiding. They're avoiding the realities. And so in family life, in leadership, organizational life, if you don't pay attention to critical realities, then you're putting your community or your people at risk. And so it's a reminder, and it's a topic that I really don't even remember ever hearing within the discussion of leadership. So not that it hasn't happened before, but that it's just not common. So it's really good. Another thing I noticed is that, someone might say, well, how would the topic of reason fit with healthcare? And it just was perfect.
It fit so perfectly that day. Yeah. And again, not intentional. I didn't intentionally align the chapter of reason with our public health day. But like most of the chapters, they seem to connect quite easily with almost any topic. But that day it just was such a perfect fit. It was,
yeah. That's one of the things that I think people hear me say when they first start with positive leadership. But they don't necessarily, they have to see it to believe it. But that you don't have to try to change the order of the capacities to try to fit and make it fit with your class topic day, because there's this kaleidoscope effect. I don't know how to say it otherwise, but where you see these surprising combinations that you wouldn't have seen, but when you open it up to your participants, those connections are there. And I loved hearing that your participants are bringing up the other capacities. It wasn't like, oh, they forgot about it and that was just something we did, but that they could actually see how another aspect of that kaleidoscope is that the capacities really just fit together in unique ways. You could take any two of those 7 capacities. I don't know what this gesture is. I'm like it's a 7-pointed star, and I'm like different points on the star, and combine them, and you get these really unique insights that come from that. So that's advanced level kind of things that are happening, but it happened because you built the capacity for that to happen by each capacity you talk about. Then people can look back and see combinations. That's a good gesture.
I like that one. Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask you about was, do your speakers comment about the capacities? Are you using that to kind of layer in more and more of the positive leadership?
Yeah, I admit there's been a few months that I have forgotten to send my speakers this chapter summaries. But the months that I have, and Reason was one that I did remember, yeah, they do. And I mean, it's because I'm reminding them to do it. I'm saying to them, if you could please comment on this in your remarks, that would be great. And most of them are doing it. Some more effectively than others and with more passion and enthusiasm than others. But I do think that that's a really nice addition, and that, to encourage folks to do that, share it with them, let them into the learning, bring them into the learning that's happening. And because it'll just make for, a much more rich discussion and help to weave that capacity throughout the day that much more. So, but yeah, in this case with Reason, we did, our practitioners did talk about it. And in the context of how did we get into this crisis, we had a couple of doctors talk with us that day, and talked a lot about the over prescription of painkillers, and how that has in many ways caused the crisis that we're in here. And so was that a reasonable choice? Did they really think about that? And how are we dealing with it now? Are we really dealing with it? Are we avoiding it? So yeah, so that came up for sure.
That's really good. And you mentioned too that that the participants really saw the authenticity of your speakers, and that's kind of what led them to talk about
purpose.
Purpose. And how that purpose gave them.
Really? Yeah. That for sure. You really saw resiliency in all of our speakers, because, it's such tough work.
Yeah.
It's such tough work. And it's really, they talked a lot about it's really easy to burn out in this work.
Yes.
How do you not burn out?
Yeah. So it's real. This stuff is real.
It is very real.
It's very real. And the last thing before we get into the content, I want to jump into that, but it was just me noticing how you just went into it with a conversational plan. You didn't have to do anything super special or plan a party for them around the topic. You didn't have to cajole them and get them excited to talk about it. That they wanted to talk about it. That sort of cascading effect of dialogue, which the word dialogue actually translates from Latin to mean flow of meaning. So discussion is where we dissect each other's viewpoints, but dialogue is when we build upon each other's viewpoints, and it just flows and it takes you into these different places. And so it starts with that launching of the pinball, the metaphor I use for facilitation, and then it bounces off the bumpers and you rack up points, so to speak, as people. I got my dog who's like blocking me, and she's an immovable object. She's just like this little pit bull that I can't move. I should maybe use her for the rest. She's just sitting here under my desk. Anyway, so yeah, all those are really great points that I hope people watching this will take with them, and to think about it. Because I know for you, your personality is, I want to do it right. I want to do the prep work and all of that. And then here you were experiencing, a confidence that the conversation among your participants is what will move things forward. That all the work isn't on your shoulders, which is also a really important lesson about leadership, is that as leaders, sometimes they feel like it's all on my shoulders. And a great book called Leadership Without Easy Answers by Ron Heifetz, who does great leadership, I highly recommend. He talks about a leader's job is to put the weight of the community, or the weight of the problem, on the community. That leaders, with good intention, want to protect their communities, but it's actually engaging when people feel like they can be part of the solution and be engaged with it. And so conversationally, it's not all on your shoulders, that the conversation is on the group's shoulders. So the sooner you can do that with your cohort, the sooner, or your class, the sooner you could get them to realize that the conversation is what they make of it. I think the better the conversation is going to be. Because otherwise, then it's going to turn into silence and lecture, and it won't be as engaging. And we really want leadership.
You don't want that. Really, you don't want that. No, but I think have trust that that's and that's the other thing I've had to remind myself, that this is their leadership experience, and so if they don't read it, then again, it's not falling on my shoulders. That's right. Decided to make that choice.
That's right.
More often than not, people have read it. I think I had one experience this whole cohort that I could tell there was a good portion of the group that didn't read it, and then we still ended up having this really amazing discussion. But so
which is why it's always
again, Leadership Without Answers. Is that what the name?
Leadership Without Easy Answers.
Easy answers.
Yeah, okay. Which that title is great, because I think that really, there's other books, like there's one I don't like. It's called The 21 Immutable Laws of Leadership. I don't like this guy's work. He's he's one of the most popular leadership writers. And I think that he tries to give easy answers, and that's not the reality of it. He tries to be the guru but I like Ron Heifetz because I think his philosophy is really true to leadership. Anyway, so let me get the PowerPoint put up here, and we'll move to screen share mode, and we'll just jump through some of this content. Give me just a moment. All right. I want to share my desktop. All right. So here we go with kind of the PowerPoint. And again, just as a reminder, you don't want to necessarily use these PowerPoints verbatim and as they're laid out, because then it becomes a lecture. But what you could use this for is if you find a couple of slides where you want to illustrate a point. Let's say you're worried that people haven't read the chapter, and so you want to give your class at least the crucial tidbits so that you could have a really good conversation. You could use some of these slides. That's what it's meant for. But the reason I shared in these videos is so I can talk through the concepts, so you and the other people who are the facilitators can have a clear understanding of the capacity, so you can better facilitate the conversation. So, again, here's that leadership model where we look at leadership as kind of that bridge between the self and the community. And that when we look at the self, we look at these 7 capacities. And we're over here with this guy standing on top of the binoculars. It's probably pretty small, but that's reason, to see things clearly. So the capacity for reason, and by the way, somebody could just stop the video if they want to read the quotes, because I want to move forward with this a little more quickly. Although I do love this quote. So leadership is the marriage of passion and reason in the service of a vision. Reason alone cannot move people, and passion alone is dangerous. And I think we're seeing this. It's 2016. It's August. We're in just the early stages of this presidential election, and just elections all over the place. And we're just seeing all the advertisements being about passion, and people are losing their minds over this. I engage in discussions online about politics, and it's just the name calling and the blanket judgments people make. And if you support this person, then I make all sorts of judgments about you, and the candidates themselves. And I don't mind saying one candidate more than another. I think history will look back on this and absolutely agree with this. So I don't mind saying this, is that one candidate is playing to the emotions of people. And dangerous is the right word. Dangerous is the right word. The leadership demands both heart and head, sensibility and good sense, combined with the conviction that we can make a better world. And that's what I'm looking for, is making things better. And that's what positive leadership is about. And people that are about the politics of destruction are not the leaders we need. And it's because we're going to feel the effects of it. It's going to endanger our community, in this case, as a nation. So this is a really, really important topic. We need reason to balance emotions. And I'm not discounting emotions. And if anybody who knows me knows I don't do that. But I'm really emphasizing reason here for this capacity. So the purpose is to emphasize the leader's role to distinguish reality from perceptions. And not leaders that confuse reality by trying to shape perceptions. We need to be careful of that in our leaders. We need to become more deliberate in weighing your perceptions against reality to enhance your capacity for reason. Because we all read the world and make sense of the world. We're all struggling to do that and to figure out what's important and what do things mean and what are the priorities and how do we go about doing things and what are the things that are hard to see that just don't hit me over the head with a 2x4 that I need to be careful of because they could grow into bigger things. So that's the desire here. So I go through these questions, and I usually almost take up all the time on these, but I'm gonna try to zip through these. These are just 7 self-reflection questions, and again, the chapter kind of follows these, so it's almost a dual purpose of a table of contents and a little examination. And again, you could use these to facilitate the conversation and get these might be your 7 pinballs that you could launch into the play. I actively question my views and perceptions. It's hard to do. Our ego doesn't want to do that, but we have to say, am I wrong? Am I reading this right? Can you check me on this? And to be open to the possibility that you aren't reading it right and so forth. I'll get through these, and if you want to comment on any of these in particular. On important decisions, I seek objective data from a range of sources. We all have those sources that we're comfortable with, that we just out of habit will go to, but can we go outside and kind of just hear what other viewpoints are? When someone disagrees with me, my first reaction is curiosity rather than defensiveness. This is so difficult. I know I'm not expecting that everybody but this is what leaders have to do if they want to really be a leader, is they have to recognize that their first reaction is just that. It's not the only reaction. And that intelligence means to choose from among the choices you have. That's what the Latin, one way to translate the original Latin is to choose from among. And if you just go with your first gut reaction, then you're not intelligent because you didn't develop any choices. Sometimes your first reaction is absolutely the right choice. But, if someone disagrees with it and brings another point of view, I know for me that when my ego kicks in, I just kind of feel it somewhere in my chest. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the opposing point of view. And I just have to learn to relax it a little bit, and that there's no harm in hearing another perspective. Before settling on a course of action, I create several viable alternatives to choose from. And that's probably where I should have brought in that idea of intelligence to choose from among. That you create an array of choices. I have surrounded myself with people who see things differently from me. You don't want enemies in your camp, but someone who disagrees with you is not your enemy, and sometimes someone who disagrees with you is your best friend. There's this little story I remember. It's a little goofy. But it's about this sparrow who was flying one day in the winter, and it felt its wings getting frozen in the sleet, and it landed on the ground, and it was stuck there, and it thought it was going to die. And then he landed in a pasture, so a cow came along and pooped on him, and that melted the ice on its wings. So it was all happy then because it wasn't going to die. It was going to be free. And he was chirping. And then a cat came along and pulled him out of the dung and ate him. Ah. And the lessons are, one, not everyone who gets you into shit is your enemy. Not everyone who gets you out of shit is your friend. And if you're happy in shit, keep your mouth closed. I know it's a little off color, but I haven't used any naughty words in any of these videos before, so I like it. Yeah, but it's the point that I really like. It's clever. All right, I make sure those who report to me feel comfortable giving me bad news. There's a great story, and this isn't really a story about reason, is The Emperor's New Clothes. And so we kind of know, most people kind of know the story, and I kind of knew the story, but I went and actually bought it. You probably find it online and read it. And I actually read the story itself. And and how the emperor ended up with no clothes, thinking that he was clothed and royally clothed. Like how that happened. It's all a story about reason. Like you could just get a children's book and read the story, and that could be the discussion prompt for the lesson. It's really, really great story about it, and I think there's so much around leadership. It's a Hans Christian Andersen story, I believe. The Emperor's New Clothes. Okay, so I am skilled at helping other people separate their perceptions from reality. That's a skill, because if you just say, no, you're wrong, people dig in and they don't want to hear it. But if you can help them explore their thinking behind it, then you could get to some really good insights. Both parties can, and you get out of that whole, my opinion can beat up your opinion thing. So any comments on any of these? Any thoughts?
I had thoughts as you were going through them. Oh gosh.
No worries. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think of what came. We did go over some of these questions during my discussion. I'm just trying to think of what people had said. And if I remember correctly, it was around, because we actually have a couple people in our class that are, most of my class is very liberal, progressive. We have a couple of more conservative, and so what came up was the idea of, can you hear people, hear their differences with an open mind kind of thing. And we kind of laughed at ourselves, because throughout the year there has been some heated discussion between these couple of participants and others about politics and other things. And it was in a moment for them to kind of step back and kind of laugh at themselves and say, yeah, I guess we can't really do that very well. And maybe that's something we need to work on, you know what I mean? And understanding the benefit in doing that. So that did come up during these questions.
Yeah, politics is a great training ground for trying to maintain reason while you're experiencing those passions that you have. There's a lot of passion involved and not nearly enough reason involved. And I actually find it really pleasurable when I talk with somebody who has a different political view than me, but we could talk about it rationally. I find that I learn things. I find that I appreciate the other point of view more. And that's not to say, oh, I'm always that way. So I get my knee-jerk reactions and I get all sucked into it. And you just have to learn to pull yourself back into being in that reasonable kind of space. It's life is way better that way.
Yeah.
Good. All right, let's just move on. So what do we mean by reason? And so what I found in my research is that it came from the Greek philosopher Thales, who said, he's the one who coined this phrase or this word, and it's the degree to which one's internal view of the world, the way I think the world is, and how well it aligns with the world as it really is. Because we all develop our little I remember this guy, he was a facilitator when I was going through my leadership program, actually. And he said, we all have our own fraction of the truth. And I just think that that's absolutely true. We all have our fraction of the truth. There's that little story about the 3 blind men and the elephant, and they're all kind of touching the elephant, and they all have a different understanding of what the elephant is based on the part of the elephant that they're touching. And so really important to make sure that our view of reality is aligned with reality as it is. That's reason. And when to the degree that someone doesn't, their view doesn't conform to reality, we say that person is unreasonable. We say you're asking for something that's just not reasonable, or you're saying something that's not reasonable. And again, in this political climate, we just hear it all over the place. These unreasonable, you're always this way, and that candidate's always doing this, and there's no nuance at all in this. It's all that way. And I think it was Ben Franklin who said, blame all and praise all are 2 blockheads. So yeah, basically reason is attuning our minds to the current and potential realities that matter most. This came up once. One of the programs that uses positive leadership had a participant who said, well, Gandhi wasn't reasonable. Martin Luther King wasn't reasonable. And they were great leaders. And I thought about that for a minute because I had that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, I don't want to hear that viewpoint. But as I thought about it more, what made sense to me is that those two saw a more reasonable world, and it was the world in the moment that was being unreasonable. That it was unreasonable to take a group of people based on their race and to severely hamper their freedoms. How could you expect anything other than civil unrest? And so that they were reasonable beyond what most people during their time could see.
Well, and then you also point out in the chapter that that reason doesn't always mean you have to be, I'm trying to think of the word. Sometimes you have to be bold and make what might look like an unreasonable action, like, wow, bold statement or against sort of the grain or against the status quo action to find that reason, which I think you bring that up in the chapter about Martin Luther King. Like his leadership was not one that was more passive at all. It was actually quite bold and against the grain for the time. But in that was reason.
Yes.
Am I saying that correct? I mean, they were not articulate, right? But I think you bring that example up really well in the chapter,
Reason isn't always obvious. Otherwise, it's just common sense, Sometimes reason, hides behind the bushes and, you got to bring it out more or point it out to other people. Or sometimes reason is in their blind spot. If you've ever tried to talk with somebody about a trait that they have and you're trying to coach them, you're trying to develop them, but they can't see it. They don't even, it's outside of their blind spot. So reason isn't always obvious. And in fact, the most important reasonable things aren't obvious. That's why we need leaders to help point out reason and help walk people to reason. That's why we can't lead by popularity polls all the time. That in fact, that's actually the definition of followership. When you take a poll and see where people are, and then you make your positions based on that, you're actually following, So yeah, but it's risky. Reason, I'm not saying reason's easy. See, it's risky to point out those things sometimes. Yeah. So why is reason relevant to leadership and and social force in particular? And the test for all of these capacities is, does it increase your social force or diminish your social force? And so when someone is unreasonable, it diminishes how you view them. It diminishes their social force. They're less likely to influence you. So the more reasonable you are, the more it increases your social force. This is what subject matter experts do. They understand their field better, and so they lead opinion through that expertise. They see a deeper reality than what most people wouldn't see because of their expertise. Mm-hmm. All right. So this diagram here is kind of where we get into what you were talking about, that avoidance. So here we have, we use this metaphor of a car with a smoking engine. Like you don't want to deal with the smoking engine, so you're like, it's fine. It's just, I don't know why it's smoking, but it's fine. And you keep driving, and that's your current reality. And your response will determine the new reality. If it's a reasonable response, it'll lead to one reality. If it's an avoidance response, this is where the avoidance comes in, it leads to another reality. Avoidance is ignoring reality. And where this came from, it's just a stupid little story. But one winter, I opened up one of my cabinets and I saw some little brown things in there and realized that they were like mice pellets, And but what I did is I just closed. I didn't want to deal with it because you got to find out where the mice are coming from, and I don't want to kill a mouse because they're just doing mousy things. But I don't want them in my house, And so I just shut the cabinet for a couple of days and I didn't worry about it. And they probably bred like, mice. And so in avoiding that reality, I probably made it worse, So that was my metaphor. Mouse droppings became my metaphor, and for me personally, for realities we'd rather not face. But it could be serious. It could be seeing the signs of opioid addiction, but not acknowledging the reality of it. And then when you could have caught it early, it becomes a full-blown syndrome that is way more costly.
Right.
Anybody that's had real family trauma or drama, probably there was avoidance in there, the abusive parent that the other spouse didn't stop that behavior, things like that. It gets real. It gets real. So the core of this model is for reason. I probably talked through a lot of this already. Yeah. So that's what this model is about. And we're going to now expand this visual metaphor down here in the next slides. So a problem requires a response. So do you choose a reasonable response or an avoidance response? And so you could talk through some examples of avoidance and what do we avoid? And I'd imagine this is kind of what came up in your group's conversation. And then it got personal, like probably wouldn't have happened on day one of your class, but as trust has been built up and, comfort and rapport, then they were able to get into more of these personal, meaningful discussions. And certainly there's times where avoidance is the appropriate response. Sometimes there's just some problems that if you can outlast them, you can outrun them, and dealing with them head on may not be the right thing to do. Of course, I want to acknowledge that. But there are dangers with avoidance. So here is where we blow up the diagram a little bit more. So we're back to the original diagram, the current reality, and then our response. And the response can take us in two different routes before we get to the new reality. The avoidance response, and you see the kind of images, you distance yourself from it, you defer action to somebody else or to another time, you just don't want to deal with it, somebody else should take care of my mice, maybe my mice will just decide, you know what, this warm, cozy house isn't really where I want to be, I want to go back out in the cold, that's not going to happen. And then you despair because, the problem got so bad. And again, talking about mice, it's comical, but talking about addiction or something severe or bankruptcy for a business or a household, layoffs, things like that. You're in despair, and then this looks like a hamburger, but it's really one of those machines that crunch the car. I don't know what you call them, but my gestures should make it very clear. So that's your new reality. Is the car is damaged and is not salvageable. The other route is a reasonable response. You invest. You care about what's going on. So this is my household, and I don't want mice in my household, and I don't want them to multiply, and I don't want, all the, disgusting stuff. So I'm going to invest. I'm going to find out what's going on. I'm going to call a pest control person. I'm going to order a humane mouse trap, which is what I would end up doing is I would just catch the mouse alive, and then I would just take them way out to my neighbor's yard. No, just kidding. I would take them way out to a field and let them go, Give them another chance. That's how I see it. Then you interpret. You invest. You investigate. Think about the word investigate, and then you interpret. You make meaning out of it. You find out what's going on. Those mouse droppings, somebody didn't just put them there, You make it, I must have mice in here. Mice reproduce, And then you intervene. You do something about it. You take the right actions. And remember, positive leadership is when you take positive actions that lead to positive results. So in that sense, the reasonable response is the positive response, and the avoidance response can be the negative response. And now you got a new reality. Look at this car. It's not only running better, it's been redesigned. It looks like a new hot rod. So you know, that's reality. The car will just change. I'm just kidding. But that's a much better reality than this over here, the car smasher. So really, you can just hold up this diagram and then talk through it with your participants, and then just take it from there. But we go into each piece, and I don't know how much time we'll spend going into it. I mean, it's written out in the book, so I don't want to just read my PowerPoint to you. But here we talk about the reason response. Again, invest, interpret, intervene. I like to keep that symmetry of letters. You know, I worked hard to find words that all began with I to communicate what I was looking for. So that's the reason response. And then I talk through each one, and you can talk through each one with your participants. You know, you can pause here and read if you're watching the video. And then you get this. And so I list some reflection questions here. What are things I'm aware of? Like just right now, what are some things in your life or in my life that I'm neglecting? I know I'm neglecting them at an intuitive level. I blocked it out of my mind. I don't want to deal with it, but I need to deal with it. It could be your health. It could be your finances. It could be your relationship. It could be probably all three. And, you know, and to look for those. And then do I take ownership of those things? Am I taking positive actions to create the reactions I do want? So if I'm avoiding something with my business around marketing, you know, can I, and maybe it means I don't know the answer. It means I don't know what move to make. Well, I can still do something. I can talk to somebody who's an expert, you know? So you can take some action to move it forward. I can outsource it. I can hire somebody else to work on it. So, you know, those what's that?
We had a couple of stories that came up that we talked about how sometimes you think you're making a reasonable choice, and then you get into it, and then you realize you don't know what to do, and it really wasn't a reasonable choice because you didn't think, you didn't gather your information, you didn't think through your options. And then what do you do there so that you keep moving forward? So you keep moving so that you don't go backwards in that decline mode, but you keep moving forward. And we just talked about being honest and open and it's okay to say, at this point in time, I'm not sure how to proceed.
Yep.
But I'm going to try to do my homework to figure out what I need to do, and being honest with the people around you so that you're accountable to say, I don't know, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
So that was something I remember, a couple of stories in that sort of around that idea.
And that's an indication someone's reasonable. I think someone's reasonable. I don't think someone's unreasonable because they made a mistake. I think someone's unreasonable when they can't admit the mistake and they can't see it was a mistake. And we're seeing that. And I think I could talk about this in a political context because both candidates have done it. You know, Hillary and the email stuff, you know, that was a mistake, you know. And Trump, who has made some comments, those were mistakes, you know. But do you own up to it, or do you double down and you fail to acknowledge it? And that speaks to someone's reason, you know, their capacity for reason. All right, good. Yeah, so these are just great questions. What are some realities I may not have considered that would be worth considering? You know, what are the improved realities that I'm striving for? You know, that's the vision that you know, that's implied, or maybe you need to, I don't know, frame out a little bit more. So anyway, and then how can I intervene more effectively to bring about those improved changes? What can I do? What's within my power? What is my responsibility in this? What would I regret if I didn't take action? These are all really just great questions. All right, so the avoidance path diminishes reality, leads to a worse reality. And that's not meant to be said with any judgment. You know, you're not a bad person. It's a human nature thing. And you can't avoid avoidance. I mean, you can't deal with everything in the world. So there's things we, by necessity, have to avoid. So we do need to be more mindful. And that's where we get the distance, defer, and despair cycle. So then I talk through each one of those, and you can pause here and read through it. I like this little abandoned vehicle on top of these blocks because you pulled your car over to the side of the road, you walked away from it, and somebody stole your tires. And then the police came along and marked it abandoned, and they're going to tow it away. You know, we've seen that happen with credit card debt or health problems or anything like that. So, and then, of course, we're talking about leadership. So in your community, it's the employee, it was the bad hire that you made, but you didn't do anything to address it. You're the manager, and there's infighting on your team, and you say the worst thing you could say, which is, you guys sort it out amongst yourselves. You're basically saying, I allow you to employ the laws of the jungle to address your infighting, because I abdicate my responsibility because I'm unreasonable. You know, I'd rather avoid the discomfortable actions of intervening, even though I'm the only one with the authority to resolve the disagreement. I instead say, you equals sort it out amongst yourselves so that the strongest will prevail, not the right will prevail. So that's it. That's reason. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that. I think it's a really, really important. What's that?
It's a great chapter.
It's a great chapter. It's really good. All right. So very good. Any parting comments?
No.
All right. Same here. So we'll end this call here, and we will continue with our next episode, which will be gratitude. All right. Thank you, Jennifer.